Alright, hi, welcome to this video. We're going to talk about how to travel Europe, especially this summer. I've traveled in Europe pretty extensively with European friends and also with American friends, and there are a few differences that I noticed between European travelers within Europe and people from elsewhere. And so this is going to be a list of just a few tips and observations that I have for everyone coming from outside of Europe to visit Europe this summer. So my number one tip is to not take taxis or rent cars. Take public transportation. It's fine. It's good. It works well. You're going to be able to understand it if you try. And it's not scary or confusing. And it really is worth it to, first of all, save money. It's a lot cheaper than taking taxis or Ubers or whatever else is available. And it also is a more real experience. So you're going to probably see a lot of stuff that you don't get to see at home if you take public transportation. Of course, if you want to do like road trips or something like that, renting a car can have its advantages. But I always recommend to get to the airport somewhere or to get from one city to another, take public transport. It's worth it and it's usually pretty fun. Number 2, don't plan too much. Europe is pretty easy to travel and to get around, and you really don't need to make like a day-to-day plan. Now, of course, if you go in like the high season and there's something very specific that you might want to do, then it's probably worth trying to book ahead. But besides that, try to just let go of all of the expectations that you have and just try to enjoy to be in the moment. If you go to Paris, just get to Paris and look around and see what you can find. If you get to London, do the same thing. If you get to Croatia or anywhere else, try to just get there first, talk to the locals, and see what might pop up. The danger is if you plan too much, then maybe you have to miss out on something that you don't even know about. A lot of travel is just trying to expand your horizon, and the unexpected is really part of the appeal of traveling, and it's not as scary as you might think. So the third tip is to be aware of the internal vacations that people take within the country that you're going to or within Europe as a whole. So, for example, the high seasons in a lot of places are July and August, and there's very specific weeks sometimes where, for example, the French children are out of school, and so everything will be flooded with French people, or the Germans will have their, I don't know, Easter vacation or whatever, and so all of a sudden everything's flooded with Germans. And so it's worth to try to figure out which areas are particularly busy at what time, and then also, if you have the ability, go in shoulder seasons, specifically later in the year. So my favorite time, for example, to travel in Europe is September, because it's off season, no one is out of school within Europe. Most of the international travelers have left, but the Mediterranean is super warm still. Most places still have their season going, so the hotels and everything are still open, but it's going to be way less crowded. We, for example, went to Croatia last April, and it was really, really nice because that's a place that usually gets super crowded in the summer, and we had it almost to ourselves. I will say that the water was still pretty cold, but if you do go later in the summer, then that would be the perfect time. And then also with Northern Europe, for example, you can go in the off season. There's a lot of stuff to explore in the seasons where it's just not as crowded, and it might just be a lot more enjoyable to go then. And then when you're doing your planning and you're trying to figure out what might be some interesting spots to go to, it's worth looking at other countries' travel magazines. And luckily you can get everything translated. So for example, if you're an American and you look at Germany's travel magazines, you're going to see way different destinations that you see in American travel magazines. So some areas that might have a really amazing tourist infrastructure might just not be on the radar of the magazines or travel publications or whatever that you're looking at. So you can look at, let's see what is Vogue Japan, what do they have to say about traveling to Europe? Or like what is, like, once again, I read a lot of German travel magazines. They highlight way different destinations than the American publication. The same publication, just a different country. They will have really interesting spots that might not be as well known, but still have a great tourist infrastructure. I think this is a good way to maybe broaden your horizon a little bit beforehand and see what else is out there besides the usual travel destinations that we already know. The next step is look at postcards when you're there. So for example, if you go to a city, for example Bordeaux, Go to like a newsstand or something and look at the postcards that are sold there. You'll have all of these beautiful postcards from destinations around that area. And there you might see a really awesome national park that you haven't heard of before, or a postcard of a coastline that looks beautiful, or a museum or something. And usually on the back of postcards it says what it is and where it is. And that's been one of the ways that we found a lot of really beautiful off the beaten path destinations while we're there, is to just look at postcards and see what is there. Sometimes it can be disappointing because postcards are obviously meant to look good, but more often than not, it's a really, really good tip. And I actually got that from my mom. My mom used to do that all the time. And then this is something that I feel like Americans are specifically guilty of. Do not conflate travel with luxury. Traveling and luxury are two different things. They can go together very well, and yes, traveling can be expensive, but you don't have to make your travel experience a luxurious experience. And this actually takes off a lot of pressure when it comes to traveling, because, you know, if you're at home, you probably wouldn't necessarily go out to dinner 5 times a week. Maybe you do, but most people I don't think do. And so the assumption that just because you're on vacation, you have to go out to dinner every night is just not necessarily true. When I talk to my American friends, I oftentimes hear how expensive traveling is, but then when I hear about the travel experiences, it's like a very luxurious experience that, of course, I couldn't afford either, and that I wouldn't necessarily think to do just because I'm on vacation. For me, honestly, it's the opposite. For me, when we're on the road, that's when the standard of living goes down a little bit, just to be able to experience more. So don't be afraid of scaling back your expectations of luxury for your trip, and instead focus way more on the actual experience and the character building nature of travel and the adventurous part of travel, and not so much of like the luxury of it. And this leads me into the next point, where I see a huge difference traveling with Europeans versus with Americans. When I travel with European friends, we really, really intensely utilize the local grocery stores. And by that I mean literally just go shopping as if we are at home. Even if we stay in a hotel or a campground or whatever, we usually really intensely use the grocery stores instead of going out to eat. So we try to cook, we try to get cheap snacks, we try to get bread and some stuff to put on the bread, or to get stuff to do a little picnic, or just something low key. We usually eat very, very low key on vacations and while traveling. I think that this is something really interesting to do, because not only does it save you a lot of money, just like it does at home, it also lets you experience another grocery store. And if you know anything about me, you know that I really, really love grocery stores, and I do think that they're a really good reflection of society at whole, and a really good spot to see real life and to see, okay, what are people eating, what are people buying, what do people have in their carts, what are the options, and how are they different to where I'm from. I think this is really, really interesting, and one of my favorite things to do while traveling is checking out other countries' grocery stores. I think it's just a good way to tap into real life in a different spot, and it's cheaper. It's just cheaper, and you might find something that you really, really love. It's also oftentimes said that it's more difficult to speak to people in Europe than it is, for example, in the US, because strangers will just start talking to you here. But I would argue that it is worth trying to speak to people in Europe as well. Oftentimes, even if you don't speak the language, it's nice to just show interest and converse and just make connections with people, even if they're short, even if they're fleeting. It's very valuable to you, and hopefully, if you can make it valuable to the person that you're speaking to. So don't be afraid to strike up a conversation. Don't treat people like they are your tour guide. Don't ask them like random questions that you can look up on Google. But don't be afraid to speak to people, and don't be afraid to be open and not only talk to fellow travelers, but also to people that you meet along the way. And then my last tip, which is very niche, but I think very worth it, is if you see a church, no matter what religion you are, if you see a church, try to go inside, because Most churches are open. Most churches in Europe specifically are beautiful architectural buildings. Most of them don't require entrance. They don't require anything really. And they're just such an interesting way to look at the culture, to look at something that is not as common, I would say. And it's just nice as long as you're respectful and dress appropriately and don't scream or be loud in the church. It's just a really interesting thing to do. And when I travel, I usually always try to, if I see a big building that looks like a church, I will try to get inside just to take a look. Because a lot of churches also look really unassuming from the outside, and then on the inside they're beautiful. So those are my tips, kind of going from very, very broad to a little bit more niche and personal to me. Yeah, I think the number one thing is to just believe that you can do it and just try it out. It's really not that hard. You're not gonna get lost. People are friendly. People are not out to get you. People will help you. The internet is broad. You can look up a bunch of stuff beforehand, but you really don't have to. I do urge everyone, if you can, try to make it a priority. Try to make travel more of a priority than any consumer goods. It really is important. I feel like in the US sometimes it's seen as something that is very, very luxurious and out of reach for many people. And while that may be true, I will say that a flight, a round trip to Europe from, for example, New York is way, 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 way cheaper than an iPhone. I think traveling and making travel a priority is a cultural thing. Me as a German, I was brought up thinking that most people spend their money on travel and that's just normal. And now living in the US, I realize that's not necessarily normal. I want to share how enriching of an experience it is and how attainable it is if you have the right mindset and the right priorities for certain things. Of course, this is not true for everybody. I know that this is a very privileged position, but I do think that it's more attainable for more people than they realize. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that maybe I took a little bit of fear away around traveling, and I just want to be a positive influence on people to go outside of their own bubble and to experience the world in a good way, in a respectful way, in like a profound way that really gives you something that you can't get at home, no matter where your home is. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will actually finally be traveling again this summer, and I'd love to have as many people along as possible because I'm really looking forward to sharing a little bit about my home of Germany and then also a little bit of stuff outside of that. So please subscribe if you're interested in that. And let me know if you have any other questions in the comments. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Driving home with my shoes off, it had been too long. The entire month, it'll probably be another one.